able to see that we're not so from. Good. Huh? Yeah. I need a second anyway. This is usually when someone starts a nigga now. Not too long ago one, I just need a few seconds. I know, right? I think it's just usually I'm later. It's Takar Shchayos, right? I waited too long. Seriously. All right. Okay. All right. So you have to. It's Rosh Chodesh. We have to mamish get ready for Yantif a little bit. Okay. So let's learn a little bit about Pesach. So the way I'm thinking is that this is going to be a two-parter. So we're going to have tonight Bez Hashem Yisparach, and next Wednesday night to be Mashlim V'Senyan. Now the way Chazal set up Pesach, specifically the Seder night, is that, as the name indicates, Seder, it's supposed to be very organized. You're supposed to know going in exactly what you're planning on doing. Kadesh, Orchatz, Karpas, V'chulu, to know exactly what to do. What's ironic though is that with the focus on understanding and organized a structured meal and a structured avodah, with that being said, Seder stands for Side, Drush, and Remez. No pshat. There is no pshat by Pesach. You know, the one sefer that has the most mefarsh written on it is the Haggadah. So if you have one small, a few brises, pretty much, a few chazals, put together, and you have literally hundreds, if not thousands of pirushim on it, it means that there's no pshat. It means there's no pshat. And that's exactly what it is. It's side remez, side drush and remez, no pshat at all. So with the fact that Chazal, so in other words, so what is the Seder? So the Seder is a very organized, structured mahalach that's kulei pnimius. It's kulei side. So that's what we have to do. So we have an achrayus, we have to do this for ourselves. We have to figure out what exactly is the practical mahalach of Pesach. Alpi pnimius. What exactly is what is being developed? What's being worked through? In pnimius, the way to go about thinking about any yontif, and specifically Pesach, is not just to think about what to do or how to do it. What is being built through these steps? So Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas, Yachas, and so on. There is something in the nefesh that's being developed, that's being built. There's a binyan that's being constructed, and that's what Pesach is in Pnimius. And every single step of Pesach and all the avodas of Pesach are different building blocks in this structure that's called Pesach in the nefesh. So we have to. So this is what we're going to try to do. So tonight, B'ez Hashem Yisbarach, what we're going to try to do is identify what is this binyan, what is this structure, what is being built, what is being developed in the neshama that's called Pesach. That's going to be B'ez Hashem tonight, and then next week we're going to then B'ez Hashem Yisbarach try to take that and to show it in application, what it looks like to go through the avodah of Pesach, hachonas to Pesach, bir chametz, and so on, including the Seder night, based on that understanding of what's being built in the neshama over Pesach. Okay, so tonight, so b'kitzer, tonight is not going to be so practical. A little bit, but B'ez Hashem, next week, that's where we're going to take these yesaitis from tonight and apply them practically. Okay, so just to begin, to sort of find a Pesach into the avodah of Pesach, into this inyan that's called Pesach in the neshama. So a few questions, and then we'll begin to explain all of them. Okay, so we have a klal, a kol hoylech achar chasayim. Everything is defined and based on how things end. The ending of something is its definition. So, if we were therefore, if throughout the Haggadah and throughout Pesach we sort of feel maybe that we have we have our bearings, we understand what's going on, what's Yetzias Mitzrayim, the story, the Makkas, like we sort of get it. All of a sudden, the end of the Seder, which is going to be the defining factor of what this was all really about, we b'chlal have no idea what it's talking about, which is the name of Chagadia and Echad Miyodea. So it must be that those two, which not all of Klal Yisrael sing those songs, but a nice sizable percentage of Klal Yisrael do that. And so if that's how the Seder ends, and then there's a minig of Shir Shirim even after the Seder, but the Seder itself, Nirtza, it ends with those two very strange songs. So it must be that that all of Pesach is somehow encapsulated by those two nigunim, by those two pizmainim of Chad Gadya and Echad Miyodea. And obviously the Tzara Shava, the common denominator between those two kapitlach, whatever you want to call them, those two nigunim, is the fact that it's complicated. Chad Gadya is a complicated story. Echad Miyodea goes from 1 all the way to 13, so it's getting bigger and bigger, more complicated. But each one has this quality that as it gets more complicated, it always keeps on returning to where it starts from, Chad Gadya or Echad Miyodea and so on. So that has to be somehow the Nekuda Pnimis of what Pesach is. So we're going to have to identify that. But that's the first Nekuda, at least to begin to open up this discussion. Since everything goes based on its ending, the Chasima defines the entirety of the topic. So if Pesach ends, or the Seder ends with Chad Gadya and Echad Miyodea, so it must be that's the defining factor of Pesach. And so the question is, what does that tell us about Pesach? What is Pesach? Okay, number one. Number two. In the Haggadah, towards the beginning of the Haggadah, we bring it's in fact a Mishnah in Maseches Brachos, a famous statement by Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, right? That is, Harini Kiven Shimashana, I'm like 70 years old, and I was always fighting for this inyan of mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim at night, that every single night you have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim just like by the day, that even in Ma'ariv you say Parshas Vayomer to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. And he says that he didn't have a real strong makar for it until Ben Zayma came and he gave me a drasha. It says, L'man tizker as yom tzeischa meretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha, right? Everyone knows, kol yemei chayecha, all the days of your life, but it says all the days of your life. So yemei chayecha means the days. And kol yemei chayecha, that's the drasha. It says it was in Zari. That tells you even at nighttime you have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Chacham, I remember the Chachamim say back, no. Kol doesn't necessarily mean to include nighttime. It means Lahav Yumaysa Mashiach. That even when Mashiach comes, and we're going to have the redemption from this big golus, we still have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's the kapitel that we mentioned in Haggadah. Now again, that's a Mishnah Maseches Brachos Daf Yud Beis and Beis. Now the Gemara over there then records a back and forth that took place between Ben Zayma and the Chachamim after that machlokes. So this is what the Gemara says. Tanya, Amar Lehem Ben Zayma leChachamim. Ben Zayma says to the Chachamim, "V'chimaskir Yetzias Mitzrayim li'Moiseh Mashiach." Wait a second, you're telling me that the word kol over there is telling you that even when Mashiach comes, you have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. L'havi l'maisa Mashiach. Said Ben Zayma, is that true? You're going to have to talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim when Mashiach comes. Well, like Varnemar, doesn't it say in Pasuk, Hine yom boim nu Hashem, days are coming, it's the coming of Mashiach. V'lo yomru oid chai Hashem asher helis b'nei Yisrael meretz Mitzrayim, and the Jewish, when those days come, when Mashiach comes, you're no longer going to describe Hashem as the God that took you out of Egypt. Ki en chai Hashem asher helav asher hevi azera beis Yisrael meretz Safina umikol haratzis. Rather, you're going to refer to Hashem as the God that took you out of the exiles from the whole world. Kibbutz Goliath, the coming of Mashiach. So says the pasuk, you're not going to talk about Hashem as the one that took you out of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is going to be an afterthought. So it says Ben Zayma to the Chacham, what are you talking about? You're going to have to mention Mitzrayim when Mashiach comes. It's not going to be. It's going to be completely irrelevant. So what the Chacham answered back, Amrulai. So they say you're right. That pasuk does tell you that. It says black and white. When Mashiach comes, Yitzias Mitzrayim is not going to be such a big deal anymore. But lo yishatei okay Yitzias Mitzrayim, but it doesn't mean you're not going to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim. It doesn't mean that Yitzias Mitzrayim is going to be completely ignored. El shei shibur g'malchiyas iker. Yitzias Mitzrayim tafel. It just means that when Mashiach comes, the main inyan is going to be the gula from this galus. Yitzias Mitzrayim will become secondary, but you'll still mention it. You'll still mention it. So, in other words, the Gemara is explaining for us that when the Chachamim have this shita, which we record in the Haggadah, which we mentioned in the Haggadah, that Kol Yemei Chayecha L'Havi L'Maisa Mashiach, that even when Mashiach comes, you're going to have to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim. Even the Chachamim agree, it doesn't mean that it's going to be such a big deal. The Iker is going to be the Gul of Mashiach. No, Yitzias Mitzrayim is still going to be mentioned, but it's a tafel. It's a secondary thing. That's the Gemara. That's the Mefursha thing, and it's based on this pasuk. That the pasuk says, "The Mashiach comes, you're not going to refer to God anymore as one that took you out of Mitzrayim. That's going to be a tafel thing. You're going to refer to Hashem as one that took you out of America. That's going to be the Gula. That's going to be the main thing. Okay. The problem is that there's another pasuk which seems to indicate the exact opposite. It says in pasuk, "Ki yimei tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim, aren neflois." That just like the days of Mitzrayim, that you saw wonders and miracles, so similar to that, Hashem is going to show wonders and miracles when we leave this galus. Ki yimei tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim, like the days that you left Mitzrayim, aren neflois. I'll show you miracles. Now we know in Hebrew, whenever there's a chaf, it always means that you're comparing something secondary to the main thing. So Ki yimei tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim indicates that the main thing is Yitzias Mitzrayim. Ki yimei tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim, a little bit similar to what happened by Mitzrayim, you're going to see wonders and miracles with Mashiach as well. So 1 second. The Gemara in Brachos is telling us the Chacham, the same Chacham, the ones that stress the point that you're going to have to mention Yitzias Mitzrayim when Mashiach comes, they themselves are telling us, yeah, but Yitzias Mitzrayim is going to be secondary. But yet the pasuk says Ki yimei tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim. That the neflois, the wonders and miracles of Mashiach are Ki yimei tzeischa. It's similar, like almost like the days of Yitzias Mitzrayim, indicating that Yitzias Mitzrayim is the Iker and Mashiach is Tafel. Even in the Seder of the Haggadah, according there's a well-known interpretation of the Vilna Gaon that indicates this as well, that the coming of Mashiach is seen somewhat secondary to Yitzias Mitzrayim. We know that we say Hallel Pesach night, right? Besides in Shul, during the Seder we say Hallel, and we split Hallel in two, right? The first half of Hallel we say the end of Magid, right? And the second half of Hallel we say by Hallel, right? So why is that? So the Vilna Gaon said, because even though it's one big Hallel, so it's sort of one big expression of thanks, but the first half of Hallel is really talking about thanking Hashem for Yitzias Mitzrayim, and the second half of Hallel is thanking Hashem for the coming of Mashiach, which hasn't yet happened, but the Emunah that we have on Pesach, we're already able to thank Hashem for the coming of Mashiach. And says the Vilna Gaon, and the fact that we thank Hashem for the coming of Mashiach is the second half of Hallel, but the main definition of what that Hallel is defined based on the first half. In other words, the Ikar Hallel of Pesach night is certainly for Yitzias Mitzrayim, but the second half of Hallel we sort of are using as a springboard to thank Hashem for the coming of Mashiach as well. In other words, says the Vilna Gaon, the coming of Mashiach, which is also celebrated Pesach night, is sort of woven within the main focus, which is Yitzias Mitzrayim. In other words, Yitzias Mitzrayim is the Iker, and the coming of Mashiach is secondary, which is based on and it's following that pasuk of Ki yimei tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim and neflois. So this is the stira. So again, we have this idea of Yitzias Mitzrayim, the relationship between Yitzias Mitzrayim and the coming of Mashiach. How do we see it? On the one hand, the Gemara says in Brachos that Mashiach is Iker and Yitzias Mitzrayim is Tafel. Yet mitzad sheni, the pasuk of Ki yimei tzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim, and how the Seder and how the Hallel, sort of is organized, indicates that Adarabah, that Yitzias Mitzrayim is Iker and Mashiach is Tafel. Okay, so that's another question. Another question you could ask is as follows. In the Surah Kedoshim, we find it's a very, very important principle when it comes to B'chlal, thinking about Pesach. And it goes back to the Zohar Kodesh. The Zohar says that b'derech klal, usually the way the system works is that we initiate. There's something that's called Esrusa de Lasata. We make an awakening from below, right? We do our avodah, and then Memela Esrusa de Le'ela. Then automatically that's the beginning. We begin down here, and the Rabbanu Shloim then responds. Mida connected. Mida. We initiate the process. Not so with Pesach. Pesach is not like that. The whole side of Pesach is Isserusa de La'ela, Isser Lasata. That first there's an awakening from above, and Memelo we respond back. The whole inyan of Pesach, Chazal even say in the Medrash, the pasuk says in Shir Shir, Medaleg alahar mekapetz alagvois. The pasuk in Shir Shir describes Hashem jumping from mountaintop to mountaintop towards us. And Chazal say that's Pesach. That's Yitzias Mitzrayim. The Yitzias Mitzrayim was not something that we deserved or we initiated at all. It was milamala. It's from above. It's from above. In the Zohar Kadosh and the Kisvei Ari, every mitzvah that we do always results in what's called the yichud, whatever that means. A yichud kushabrichu shchinte, and the yichud of Pesach is described by the Mekubalim as zivuga de la'ela, a yichud from above. It's above. It's coming from a higher place. Fine. That's the aside. That's the aside. You'll find this in many svarim. That's a big mafteach in the inyan of Pesach. But here's the problem. There's a lot of avodah with Pesach. There's a lot of avodah. There seems to be a lot of hachana that we put into Pesach, maybe even more than other Yom Tovim. And even by Mitzrayim, the Jewish people put in a lot of avodah in order to then experience Yitzias Mitzrayim. So we have this idea that Yitzias Mitzrayim is coming from Mamash above, matana from above. I don't know. See, if it was really such a matana, then why does it take so much effort for us to receive it? So what's going on over here? With all the avodas that we have, both nowadays for Pesach and by the times of Yitzias Mitzrayim, all the yisur and the suffering and the difficulty that the Jewish people went through, all of that was, usually we would think that would be enough hachana, enough avodah in order to initiate from below, to get something happening from above. So what is it about the nature of Pesach? So in other words, so it must be that this idea that Pesach is initiated from above, it's not because a lack of our effort. It must be that with all of our effort, there's something that's being initiated, that's happening on Pesach, that's beyond our grasp to ultimately initiate. So in other words, when you have this idea that Pesach is from above, again, you might make the mistake of thinking, why? Because we just didn't deserve it, or we didn't put in enough effort. So Hashem, in His kindness, usually waits for us to start. But over here, Hashem said, you know what? I'll do it on my own. But it's not like that, because Klal Yisrael, we're working very hard, and we still work very hard, and still it's defined as something that's happening from above, which means that it's not, this idea of it happening from above is not a lack of our preparation. It's that there's something essentially about Pesach that cannot be initiated from below. And all of our avodah down here is just to receive what's happening and to prepare ourselves for that gift that's called Pesach. So what is it? What exactly is happening on Pesach that fundamentally cannot be initiated from below, that has to come from above? Okay. Another final question. When it comes to Pesach, so Moshe Rabbeinu is standing by the burning bush, right? And he asks the Rebbeinu Shalom basically like what is Pesach about? Like what is this? What's this whole avodah? What is Yitzias Mitzrayim for? So Rebbeinu Shalom gives a famous answer that you're going to take them out of Mitzrayim and tavdun es Elokim al har hazeh, and through Yitzias Mitzrayim, the Jewish people will then be able to stand by Har Sinai to receive the Torah. Now, the deeper understanding of that sentence of Hashem, Tavdun es Elokim al har hazeh, and Stam B'chlal, to understand the context of Pesach flowing into Shavuos, is that the Rebbeinu Shalom wants to give us the Torah. The Rebbeinu Shalom always wanted to give us the Torah. From the time of Avraham Avinu, from the time of the beginning, He wanted to give us the Torah. But there is a fear. There's kiviyachol. There is a fear that Hashem has if He were to give us the Torah. There's some danger in receiving the Torah. There's some deficiency. There's some problem that might be brought out if we receive the Torah. And in order to fix that problem, which maybe is beyond our ability to fix, but to fix that problem, we have to go through Pesach. So the way to think of Pesach, Tavdun es Elokim al har hazeh, means not just that in order to receive the Torah, you have to earn it. It's more than that. There's something that needs to be worked through in order to allow us, collectively and individually, to receive the Torah healthfully. In order to receive the Torah healthfully, we have to go through this inyan that's called Pesach, that's called Yetzias Mitzrayim, and then you'll be able to receive the Torah in a healthy way. So we have to figure out what is this concern that the Rebbeinu Shalom has with just giving us the Torah. Why do we have to go through Mitzrayim, Chulu, and then only then we'll be able to receive the Torah? Why? What's holding everything up? Why can't we just receive the Torah? Why couldn't Avraham Avinu receive the Torah? What's the problem? Why do we have to go through this avodah of Pesach in order to then receive the Torah? Okay, fine. Those are the questions. Now, in the Kisvei Ari, the Arizal talks about this in a number of places. It's one of the Iker Mafteches, the Iker keys to begin to unpack the sugya of Pesach. The Arizal says we have to appreciate that Pesach, the whole inning of Mitzrayim, the Golus of Mitzrayim, and then the redemption from Mitzrayim, was not just like out of nowhere. In the Psukim, historically, we find ourselves in Mitzrayim, and then Parai has this Mishagas that he hates Yidden, or he's afraid of us, whatever it is, and the slavery begins. According to Arizal, the Inyan of Mitzrayim, the Golus and the Gul of Mitzrayim has to be seen from a much larger historical perspective. Said the Riyah Kaddish, the neshamis of the Jewish people that found themselves in Mitzrayim, this was not the first time we were here. It was not the first time we were here. The Rizal said that those neshamis of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, their first Gilgul, their first incarnation in the world was in fact the Dar HaMabul. And the Dar HaMabul, with all of its craziness, obviously did not work out. Then those neshamas came back a second time in the Dar HaFlaga, also did not work out. Those neshamas came back even a third time in the city of Sodom, also did not work out. And finally, the fourth time they come down is in Mitzrayim, in the story of Golus Mitzrayim. And now, Baruch Hashem, they found the Tikkun. And so, according to the Arizal, the story of Pesach, you have to see it as the fixing, the correcting of something that was going wrong for a number of generations, from the Mabul to the Aflaga to Sodom. There was some issue going on over there that was causing a lot of difficulty, a lot of chaos. Again, from the Mabul, Haflaga, and Sodom. And for whatever reason, the Rebbeinu Shalom decided, okay, that in Mitzrayim, this is going to be the time and the place to correct this problem that's been flaring for all those previous generations. And once that problem is solved, like I mentioned, Tavdinus L'Kim L'Harazeh, now you can receive the Torah. So this issue that I mentioned before, there's some issue that's holding the world back from receiving the Torah healthfully. That problem was flaring itself up by the Mabul, by the Aflaga, by Sodom. And by Mitzrayim, it was corrected, and now you can receive the Torah. And by the way, this is not ancient history. The Mekubalim has said that generation of Mabul, Haflaga, Sodom, and then Yetzias Mitzrayim is going to reemerge in Ikus Mashiach before Mashiach comes. And so this story of understanding what the problem is and what the solution is, which is Pesach, to allow us to stand by Har Sinai, is also going to be needed to allow us to eventually greet Mashiach. And so this is a Shem, it should be negeh halacha l'maisa. Okay, so what's the nakuda? Okay, so here's the nakuda. In the Zohar Kadosh we find that the Mabul, the Haflaga, and Sodom all share one basic, one thing in common, which is riboy shefa. Riboy Shafa, an abundance of hashpa. Let me explain. What is Torah? When we stood by Har Sinai, so it's an interesting thing in Parshas Yisrael. So as an intro to Kabbalah Torah, so it says in Pasuk Vaydaber Elokim as Kol Hadvar Me'el Leimer, that Elokim, that Hashem said all these things. So it's a funny thing. It's Kol Hadvar Me'el. What do you mean Kol Hadvar Me'el? Vaydaber Hashem, Vaydaber Elokim El Moshe Leimar. And it says, the Ten Commandments. There is a Kol Hadvar Meila. Kol Hadvar Meila means that Torah, when the Rebbeinu Shalom gives the Torah, what's happening is the Rebbeinu Shalom is not giving a small little gift. The Rebbeinu Shalom is giving everything. Riboy Shafa, an unbelievable amount of hashpa, of light, of divinity, of energy. Chazal saying in Pirkei Avos, Hafoich ba v'hafoich ba dekula ba. that any little piece of Torah, if you investigate and turn it over and pull it apart, you'll find everything there. So if every little piece of Torah has everything, so you can imagine what all of Torah is. When the Rebbeinu Shalom gives the Torah, it's not just giving us commandments. The Rebbeinu Shalom is giving us everything. Kol hadvar ma'ela. And understand that everything that's physical has its roots in the spiritual. So if the Rebbeinu Shalom is giving us the Torah, and the Torah is the entirety of the spiritual universes just being given to us, in one huge moment, then with that comes an incredible amount of gashmiistic hashpah as well. And so, for example, Chazal say that Moshe Rabbeinu was extremely wealthy. Why? Because when he had to carve the luchas, by the second luchas, so the little psilis, the little leftover pieces from the luchas, he was able to keep for himself, and that made him extremely wealthy because it was sapphire. Why does everything have to be so expensive? Like, why, whatever. First of all, regular rock, regular stone. The Mishkan, right? The Mishkan is like crazy expensive. Everything is unbelievable shefa. We come out of Mitzrayim, we're taking all the bounty, all the booty, and by Kriyas Yamsuf, it's unbelievable. Why so much shefa? The answer is because it's not the Rebbeinu Shalom was giving us a Torah and says, you know what? Let's also give you money. No. Giving of the Torah means the Rebbeinu Shalom is giving us everythingness. All of the Olam Yisrael, all of divine influx, divine energy, it's a lot. And when the Rebbeinu Shalom gives you ruchnius, it's a memela. By the time when that reality of Torah descends to planet Earth in a physical way, so it also comes with a physical expression as well. So it's riboy shefa. Whenever there's an incredibly abundant amount of shefa that comes to a person or to a people, there's always a danger. The danger is in the Svarim, it's called shviras hakelim, a breaking, a shattering of the vessels. As a person has a certain amount of kelim to receive, but like a light bulb, right? That's if a light bulb that's 20 watt, whatever it is, and you put it in a thing that has 100 watt, then what's going to happen? It's going to bust. What was going on by the Mabul? Like why did the world go crazy all of a sudden? Like what was going on over there? By the Haflaga also, like why is everyone going crazy? Even by Sedaim, why is civilization going so haywire that they can't function as normal, healthy people? The Mabul in its way, Haflaga in its way, and Sedaim in its way. The answer is, the Zohar Kodesh says, because in each one of those generations, the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted to give the Torah. There was a predisposition in those generations to receive the Torah. Why? Because the neshamas of the Jewish people were in those generations. The neshamas of the Jewish people that would eventually stand by Sinai to receive the Torah. So the first time those neshamas come to the world in the generation of Mabul, they're predisposed. They're custom made to receive Torah. What is Torah? Everything. That's riboy shefa. But the problem is that the kalim that those neshamas had at those times in those generations were unprepared for such an abundance of shefa. So not only it doesn't just mean that the wealth. And when, let's put it this way, and when that abundance of shefa comes without the kalim, without the people being prepared to receive it healthfully, then all of a sudden there's going to be a shviras hakelim. There's a shattering of those vessels. How does the shattering of vessels express itself? It expresses itself in different ways. So by the Mabul, it expresses itself with the people going meshiga over taivas. And Chazal even say that the reason why they went crazy is because the Rebbeinu Shalom gave them the en olam haba. In other words, an overabundance of shefa. Not just in Gashmis, but in Ruchnis also. They were living hundreds and hundreds of years. That's an indicator of what type of shefa was coming into reality from the higher world, a shefa that's coming from a place of arichas yom. And with that, they didn't have the kelim to process it, so they go crazy. Haflaga also. Haflaga, again, it expressed itself, the shviras hakelim over there expressed itself differently in their desire of independence, of fighting against this higher power as if they have the power themselves, all because of this unbelievable shefa that they received, building up their own ego. That's the shattering of the vessels. And Sedaim also. Sedaim is the pasuk describes the place of Sedaim as Kegan Hashem, like Mamish Gan Eden, right? Why? So I understand in the simple context over there, it's to explain why light is interested in going there. But that could just be a Rashi. Why does it have to be a pasuk? The pasuk is telling us what's going on over there in Sidon. The problem with Sidon was Royim v'chataim l'Hashem Moed. Why? Because it's Kagan Hashem, because it was such unbelievable shefa. And there was a reason for that, is because those generations were contained within them the souls of the Jewish people that were going to stand by Har Sinai to receive Kol Advar Meila and receive all the Rechush of Mitzrayim. And so they're predisposed and custom made for this, for that experience, and they weren't ready to handle it. They weren't able to handle it. Comes Shibud Mitzrayim. And Mitzrayim, the Rebbeinu Shalom decided with his infinite wisdom that is going to be the place, and the golus of Mitzrayim is going to be the experience that's going to prepare the Jewish people to finally have the kelim to receive the shefa of Torah. And once we go through that catharsis, that ending of Mitzrayim, which is Pesach, now we could stand by Har Sinai and Taka receive Kol Dvar Me'ela without there being a shattering of the vessels. And this is, by the way, that Rizal talks about this. This is why by the Golus of Mitzrayim we find three aspects of that exile that's mentioned in Chumash. First of all, the fact that the Chaymer Uluvainim, right? They have to build cities. They're building for Parai. That's a tikkun for the Dar HaFlaga. We're building towers to rebel against Hashem. Another aspect in Mitzrayim is Kol Haben HaYilod Yair Tashlichu, that the firstborn boys should be thrown into the river, right? That's a tikkun for the Dar HaMabul, of being drowned. And then you have Sari Misim, L'man HaNaisim Sevloisam, taskmasters that are cruel and in their forcing them cheshbainis of without any chesed at all. That's a tikkun for Anshe Sodom, for the city of Sodom, that was cruel in its rigidity, unwilling to bend at all in acknowledging other people's inabilities to live up to their demands. And so the whole inyan of Mitzrayim is to misaken those inyanim, but in a more pneumistic way. Ultimately, what Mitzrayim is about giving us the ability to finally receive, to develop the kelim, to then receive the shefa of Torah. So we don't receive everything on Pesach. We receive everything, the kol advar me'el on Shavuos. But what happens on Pesach is our ability, we're being prepared to handle riboy shefa that comes on Shavuos. So what is the Nakuda? So what is that Nakuda? So in order to explain this, let me share with you a Torah that we have from the Baal Tanya. It's the Baal Tanya mentions it, Kemat, whenever the Baal Tanya talks about Pesach, it goes back to this Nakuda. There's a Chazal that the Baal Tanya is fond of referencing when it comes to Pesach. Chazal say the following lashon. It's a Gemara in Brachos and Sanhedrin also. The Gemara says as follows: Ein hatinik yedei likros abba v'ima at sheyitayim tam dagam. The Gemara says that a child, is unable to say Abba, Ima, Mama, Mommy, Daddy, whatever the language is, until he tastes or until she tastes the taste of dagan, of wheat, of the 5 grains of grain. In other words, on a simple level, the Gemara is telling us that pasha in the development of a person, that before the baby is able to eat solid food, then don't expect the intelligence to be there to be able to say words, Abba, Ima. But once the baby's old enough to have solid food, so then the baby will be also the intelligence to be able to say Abba Ima, to say a few words. And the first words of a baby usually is Abba Ima, something, whatever the language might be. Okay, that's the Gemara. Baal Tanya explains that that's not just telling us about the development of a person physically. That's a key to understand Pesach. It's a key to understand Pesach. Because we understand that part of the secret of Pesach, we're not going to talk about this too much tonight probably, but part of the secret of Pesach is that the Jewish people were now finally old enough to say Abba V'im. Right? It's one of the themes of Pesach is to be able to speak. Before Pesach, we couldn't speak. Right? We're making a lot of noises. Vayizaku, vayanchu. We're moaning, we're groaning, but we're not speaking. Moshe Rabbeinu is kvad ped kvalosh, and Moshe Rabbeinu cannot speak. The Gula of Mitzrayim is somehow connected to the Jewish people developing the ability to say Abba Ima. And that comes with tasting the tam dagan, with tasting grain, having solid food. And that's the secret of matzah. So matzah, that's what Baal Tanya understands, that matzah is the secret. The secret of Pesach is obviously all revolving around matzah. Nowadays, that's the only deraisa mitzvah in Achila that we have. We don't have the current Pesach, but it's all matzah. Matzah is the dagan that the tinak, that the child, the Jewish people are consuming to then allow us to say Abba Ima. So what does that mean? So here's the Nakuda. The reason why the Mabul, the Haflaga, I want to try to say this as simply as possible. And the next week we'll be able to make it even more pashut, hopefully, and give us some mahalach about how to go about doing this. But here's the point. The reason why with the Mabul, the Haflaga, and Sedaim, or Bechlal, with Riboy Shefa, the Kalim are overwhelmed, is because of a very basic truth that Chazal say, and we've all experienced this, which is Tefasta Meruba is like Tefasta, right? Guy's juggling a few balls. It's okay, he can handle 3 balls. You start throwing another 5 balls at him, then all the balls drop. Tefasta like Tefasta. When you have a Riboy Shefa, or you have Kol Hadvar Me'ela, then the kalim they're pushing not big enough for kol hadvar me'ela. So how could I handle this and that all at the same time? And that's true spiritually. So a person says, how can you learn kol Torah kula? I can't hold on to all this information. I can't be juggling all these balls. And even in the soul, I don't have the strength to juggle all the shefa and gashmias as well. Whenever there is a riboy shefa, the source of the breaking of the vessels, the inability to receive it properly, is because of the manyness of the experience. There's just so many balls that are being thrown at me. So how do you solve that problem? So you could just not be given shefa. That's not what the Rosh wants us to give us a Torah. So what's the solution? The solution is to realize and to develop within the soul the ability to discern that all those balls and all that shefa that's being thrown at me are really truly being given to me simply to give context to something much more essential and much deeper than just the shefa itself. So I'll give you an example. Chazal say. I don't have a good example, honestly, but I'm going to try. Chazal say that Rabbi Meir, when Rabbi Meir had a vart, Rabbi Meir Rabbi Meir also, the Chazal say about Shlomo Melech, Pesach said about Shlomo Melech. Shlomo Melech was so great, he was able to give 3,000 mashals to one idea. Why do you need so many mashals? You need so many mashals. And can you imagine trying to remember 3,000 mashals? All those mishalim that Shlomo Melech gave, if a person were hearing those stories and all they're trying to get are just to try to remember are the mashals, then guess what? You're going to go through that shir and you're going to get nothing. Tefasta mulei tefasta. Elamai. All those mishalim that Shlomo Melech taught were, as the word, they're mishalim, they're parables. For what? These are 3,000 different ways through which Shlomo Melech is trying to give over a nimshal, something that really cannot be said, something more soidi, something more pneumistic, something more essence. And whenever you're dealing with something that's essence, it never can really be said. You need riboy levushim. You need many garments. You need many different ways to talk about it. Bechinas. And if a person hears bechina, mashal, different aspects, and all they're trying to hold on to are all the different aspects, then all the balls are going to drop. But the answer is all those balls, all those mishalim, all those different bechinas are really just there to give a broader context and a broader to paint a universe in which you can then receive the essence of what is being sort of dressed up in those levushim. The essential ability and the essential ability for a person to withstand the giving of the Torah is to realize that with all the shefa, with all the kol advar me'ela, it all boils down to one essential truth which never changes, never will change. And kol hadvar me'ela is just to give deepening and bigger context and more mishalim to try to allow this one most pashut essential truth to be experienced more and more and deeper and deeper and deeper. And what is that essential truth? Anoichi havaya elikecha, the essence of God Himself. See, why is it that by Har Sinai it says Anoichi Hashem elikecha asher tzesicha meretz Mitzrayim? Everyone knows. Rishonim Chazal ask a question. Asher tzesicha meretz Mitzrayim. That's the biggest thing God ever did. What about the fact that God created the universe? That's probably a bigger crazier thing than Yetzias Mitzrayim? The answer is that's not creating the universe tells us that there is a God. But who that God is not being given to us necessarily on a silver platter. What happened by Yetzias Mitzrayim and what allows the Jewish people to receive the Torah is the Rabbanu Shalom injects us on Pesach with a tam, with a taste, with a predisposition and an ability to hone in on God Himself. And God Himself might need 3,000 mashals. And God Himself might need kol hadvar me'ela to allow Him to be sort of given context. But if a person is all focused on kol hadvar me'ela, then you're going to drop all those balls. And all the shefa that comes with all the hashpos of ruchnias are going to just result in a mabul and darflug and so on. The way in which a person is able to handle an unbelievable abundance of shefa in ruchnias and in gashmias is by realizing that all of that shefa is really just there to give context to something that is not necessarily obvious when you just look at all the balls and all the kol d'ramela. All the inyanim, all the shefa is there to give packaging and context to God Himself, to the essence of God Himself, and that is the chiddush of Yetzias Mitzrayim. The chiddush of Yetzias Mitzrayim is the Jewish soul being given the ability to experience not just the 3,000 mashals to God, and not just the 3,000 or 613 ways in which God is telling us how to live or directing our lives, but the Jewish soul is being given the ability on Pesach to actually focus itself and actually have the ability to grasp God Himself in those 613 ways. And that is fundamentally something that we could not do on our own. Because unless you're God Himself, then God Himself is unimaginable to you and ungraspable. I mentioned this I think it was last week, that the Zohar Kodesh says a line. Most people know the first part of the line. Not most people, whatever. Those that know the Zohar Kodesh usually only know the first part. The second part, not as much. It says in the Zohar, "Les machshava tefisa beklal," that no mind can grasp God. And so that's usually where it ends. Okay, God's unknowable, ingraspable. And so, therefore, what is all of Yiddishkeit then? Well, it's not God Himself because no mind can grasp God. So then all it is just 613 balls. That's very hard to juggle. But that's what the first sentence of the Zohar. And then the Zohar continues, but avalhu nitfas b'riyus deliba, but he is graspable in the deepest part of the heart. So the mind can't grasp God, but the Jewish heart does grasp God. And that deepest part of the soul that does know who God is needs the mind to come up with 3,000 mashals to give expression to that truth that the heart already knows. And that's what Pesach is. Pesach is the injection of Re'usa Deliba. It's an injection of that part of the Jewish soul that knows exactly who God is and is not distracted by anything else but that. That's Pesach. This is why it says, for example, when it comes to Yetzias Mitzrayim, it's a Peldic thing. It says that at the night of Pesach night, right, by Yetzias Mitzrayim, Malchus B'chorz, La Yachratz Kelv L'Shayna, that no dog barked. Wow, such a wonder. And more than that, right? Chazal say because of that, the dogs get a gift. That the pasuk says whenever a person has a shechs a cow, whatever it is, and it's not kosher, it's an avela treifa, so you throw it to the dogs. Like lekelev tashlichon, I say. What's this inyan that Pesach comes with lo yachratz kelv l'shayna? Kelev is an acronym, is Rosh Hashanah of kuloi lev. Kuloi lev. What was happening Pesach night is there was an injection of the heart of the Jewish people. Re'usa deliba, the desire of the heart, the part of the Jewish soul that knows who God is, that experiences God, that knows the nimshal, and that expressed itself in this animal that's called a kelev, which is the representation of kulei lev, that it's humbled before the Jewish people who are really kulei lev. That's leyachetz kelev l'shayna, and so this is the nekuda pnimis of Pesach is. Let's go back. This is why we asked the question. This is why, for example, why is Pesach something that has to happen from above? Why can't we, with all our Vaida, why can't we initiate Pesach? The answer is because what is Pesach essentially is the Jewish soul being given a taste of God himself, the ability to experience God himself, to know who God is. You can't figure that out on your own. You have to be given that. So automatically, the best you can do is to work on, we'll speak about this soon, to be able to work to receive this reuse of the Liebe. You can't acquire it on your own. It's like there's a well-known statement from the Rishonim. If someone that knows God, in order to, if you claim to know God, it means you're God. So if it's taka true that the Jewish heart knows God, then that means it's not man-made. It can't be man-made, right? It has to be God-made by its very definition. This is why Pesach, again, as I said, this is why Pesach fundamentally is the preparation to stand by Har Sinai. Because again, what went wrong by the Malbel, by the Haflaga, and by the city of Sodom was they were given Riboy Shafa, but it was Kulei Mashal. They were all just, it was just balls being, it was just sick. It was called Vermeila, but it wasn't Anochi Hashem Lekecha Asher Tzisichim Eretz Mitzrayim. This is why, for example, it's brought down in the Sfarim, again, this is connected to what I spoke about last week, that the word Mitzrayim equals Begematria, the word Mispar, which means number. It's a Pella. There's a lot of numbers when it comes to, think about how it was predestined from the very beginning how many years we're going to be in Mitzrayim. Although it's like worked at 400, 210, Cheshbainis, there's a lot of Cheshbainis. What's the first word Parai says to Yaakov Avinu? And we know that Yaakov Avinu's descent to Mitzrayim already is the beginning of the Galus. The first word that Parai says to Yaakov Avinu back in Parshas, Parshas Vayechi? Parshas Vayigash. So it said the first Parai says is Kama. How old are you? That's the first word. It's like an obsession with numbers. Obsession with numbers. What's Yitzias Mitzrayim? See, what are numbers? Numbers, even if it's the number, numbers mean many. That's to mean many. When you're trying to count the balls, it's numbers. Yitzias Mitzrayim means getting out of that musig of numbers and trying to get to the essence, the zach itself, not its numerical value, the zach itself. That's Yitzias Mitzrayim. To find that point, and in others, the way to translate that in Avodas Hashem means not to get obsessed and not to be completely overwhelmed by the shefa, but by realizing that all that shefa is just to give nuance and context and expression to the one single truth that you always knew and always will know, which was implanted in your heart by God Himself, by Yitzias Mitzrayim. And that's essentially what Yitzias Mitzrayim is. And all the avodas of Pesach, as we'll see, all the avodas of Pesach, from Bir Chametz all the way till Chag Gadya and Vayter, is really all revolving on this nekuda of establishing, of allowing ourselves to receive reuse of the liba, this nekuda of the soul that knows who God is, that has tasted who God is, and is not going to be distracted by anything other than God Himself. And everything else that we're being given, leading up to Har Sinai, is all just to give context and to give a little bit of an expression of that nekuda of reuse of the liba. And this is why the kalim don't break, because once Pesach comes, then all the kalim are interested is one small point, one essential point, and it's not overwhelmed by the riboy shav, by the many things. Because all the many stuff are just mishalim to give context to one basic nimshal. Now that basic nimshal is God Himself, and because of that, as I said, it's not something we could figure out on our own, but it is something that we have avodas in place to receive and to experience. And so, let's go back to answer some of the questions. This is why, when we talk about the difference, the relationship between the coming of Mashiach, for example, and Pesach, right? Remember that? So the question is like, which one is Iker, which one's Tafel? The answer is, again, it depends. What does Mashiach mean? Mashiach means, if Har Sinai was Kol Ramela, was Riboy Shafa, then Chazal say the Torah of this world is nothing compared to the Torah of Mashiach. So if the Torah of this world is so much, then the Torah of Mashiach is infinitely even more. So when we talk about Riboy Shef of Kol Advar Me'ela, there's no tekufa that's more Kol Advar Me'ela, there's no tekufa that's more Kol Yimei Chayecha than Lahavi Yemaisa Mashiach. So in terms of Shefa, there's no question about it that the Geula of Mashiach is going to overwhelm the experience and the Shefa that we experience by Yitzias Mitzrayim. And so in terms of the objective balls and the amount of hashpayas and nisim and niflayas, of course, Bias Mashiach is going to be greater than Yitzias Mitzrayim, and Yitzias Mitzrayim is tafel, a secondary to the coming of Mashiach. That's the Gemara Brachas. But our ability to experience Mashiach without being broken by it, without being overwhelmed by that experience, ultimately still boils down to the experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Because without Yetzias Mitzrayim, then we couldn't receive Mashiach either. So from the perspective, so in other words, the actual experience, Mashiach overwhelms Yetzias Mitzrayim, for sure. But our ability to experience healthfully Yetzias Bias and Mashiach, and deeper than that, what does Mashiach mean? Mashiach means a full revelation of who God is. That's just an unpackaging of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yetzias Mitzrayim is ultimately there to give us the ability to receive Mashiach properly, and ultimately Mashiach is really there to give context to what Pesach is. So if you're just focused on the mashals, so to speak, on the balls, Mashiach is greater than the balls of Mashiach are greater than the balls of Yetzias Mitzrayim. The mashals are greater, the shefa is greater for sure. But when you realize that it's all misholim to a nimshal, well, that nimshal was given to us ultimately on Pesach, and everything since then are simply misholim to give expression to that nimshal, which was Anochi Hashem Elokecha, that always will be Asher Tzitzicha Meretz Mitzrayim. This is why, by the way, just as an aside, this is why Pesach, there's a very strong theme when it comes to Pesach, which is the middle. The middle. Right? If you think about it, Chatzos, right? That's what Marcus was, the middle of the night. Chatzos. One of the songs at the end of Pesach is like a whole pisman, a whole thing, talking about all the things that happened Chatzos Alayla, midnight, right? Midnight. Which matzah is the most ikr one in terms of fulfilling the mitzvah of matzah properly? Lechem Ayni. It's the middle matzah, you break it, right? What's this meaning of middle? Middle means nakuda pnimis, you understand? Middle means the essential nakuda. Not extremes where you get lost in the mashal. Tzumzach, the essence, the essential nakuda. The nakuda pnimis. The nakuda pnimis, that's Pesach. The holiness of Pesach is like that. And so what we're going to see, Bez Hashem, next week is that all the simanim of Pesach night, of the Seder, are going through, it's sort of a, it's sort of a practice run, I guess you can say, of going through all the types of shefa that a person can receive, and every single siman of Seder night is a different type of shefa that a person can receive, all good things, but every single one of the simanim are trying to reinforce that experience with still focusing on the nekuda pnimis. And when we go through Pesach night with all the simanim, which corresponds to all the types of shefas that we'll receive by Har Sinai, and we'll receive, God willing, Havi U'Maisa Mashiach, we're reinforcing our focus, Pesach night, that with all of that, we're not going to get distracted from the Nekuda Pnimis. Adarabah, all that shefa is going to help us focus in more on the Nekuda Pnimis. And that's what Pesach night is about. Just for a few more minutes, though, let me begin to open up the world to prepare ourselves for this. This is I don't know if I ever really explained this. Maybe I'll go back to explain it. This is what it means when it's from the Baal Tanya, from the Gemara, right? That the tinuk to say Abba v'Ima. When you say Abba v'Ima, so the Baal Tanya explains when a kid says Mama, Dada, whatever, Abba Ima, the kid doesn't know what that means. So in other words, when the kid says Mommy, Daddy, they don't know what that means. Mommy, Daddy. What does it mean to be a mother? What to be a father? How did you become my parent? Like the kid has no moichin to understand that. What does the child mean when he says Abba v'Ima? It means you. It means you. It's the atznius, the essence, the essential nekuda pnimis of who this person is without getting caught up in the levushin because the kid doesn't know any of the levushin. So what is matzah? What's the difference between matzah and chametz? The difference between matzah and chametz is matzah is essence. Is that all it is flour and water, and it has not been changed. You put it in the oven like a matzah, it comes out looking like a matzah. It didn't go through any chemical change. Nothing. It is what it is. It's atzmius. It's essence. It's the reinforcing of this aspect of the soul to be drawn after essence. And that's what Pesach is. Okay, so maybe, fine. And this is going back. This is why, how does the Seder end? Chad Gadya Echem Yodeh. Because again, that's exactly, what is Chad Gadya about? A lot of zachen. There's a goat, and there's a cat, and there's a dog, and there's a stick, and a there's a whole lot of stuff that's going on over there. lot of inyanim, but it boils down. It always starts with one thing and it ends with one thing. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Whatever that story is about. It's not, the point is not to explain the mashal and the nimshal of Chad Gadya, but you just see in the theme of Chad Gadya is that with all the riboy shefa, with all the abundance of characters that are constantly introduced in that storyline of Chad Gadya, nothing ultimately changes. It's still all revolving around Chad Gadya. Echad miyodea. More and more numbers, but it all is being brought back essentially to that one nekuda pnimis. That's called Echad miyodea, Echad Elokeinu Shavashamayim V'aretz. That's what Pesach is. Okay, so Bez Hashem next week, based on this, we'll begin to go through the avoid of Pesach, again, like I said, from Bir Chametz, v'chulu, in order to figure out, because again, here's the Nakuda. There is nothing that we can possibly do to truly develop within ourselves this ability of knowing who God is and being drawn after God himself. That we have to receive from above. That's the Rusa Deliba, that's the heart of hearts that is being given to us in Pesach. What is our Avodah? So our Avodah in Pesach is going to be somehow preparing ourselves to receive that. Moving away from our own personal nigiyas, whatever the avodas are, in order to allow giving ourselves the environment that is suitable for that gift that's called Rusa Deliba. That's going to be the avodah of Pesach. And that's Bez Hashem, what we'll see next week, step by step, okay?